Okay. All right. Well, I have got 1:30 on my phone, so that's the official time because that's what my iPhone tells me it is. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a great group of participants today. Welcome and thank you for calling in to this month's Florida Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area monthly call. Hopefully everybody is online and on audio. You can join via the phone or through your computer. Just one note, please mute your line if you're not actively speaking, but don't forget if you do want to jump in and have a question or want to talk to unmute yourself. I often forget to do that myself. So today we have a great presentation. We're going to hear from Dr. Jim Kuda about some updates on the Brazilian pepper invasion in Florida and the biocontrol they've been working on for that. And we're going to get a CISMA update from Treasure Coast CISMA. Just want to note, we've got about 20 people on the call so far. We'll have a few more join in. Looks like we've got some pretty good coverage in Florida and the CISMAs. And I think we even have a few folks on the call from Hawaii this afternoon, this morning for them. I reached out to some of my partners there because I knew that this topic could be of interest. Hawaii has its own issues with Brazilian pepper, so I knew that Dr. Kuda's work crossed the boundaries in that way. So welcome to everybody who's joined us today. Thank you so much for calling in. I wanted to take a quick note to talk about what the Florida Invasive Species Partnership is. We host these monthly calls, and essentially FISP is facilitates partnerships in Florida that prevent and control the threat of invasive species on public and private lands and waters in Florida. So that's our mission, and that includes kind of acting as this umbrella organization that helps connect all the CISMAs and all the different partners in Florida. So just kind of let you know who we are, and if you have any questions about FISP or want to talk more about it, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And on that note, I'll probably share this slide again, maybe in the next call, and then I can drop it. But I came on board in April, and I'm really excited to be here and working with everybody. So if you haven't already and you're a CISMA lead, please add me to your email list for your CISMA. And if you have an email list that is, for another group that's related to invasive species in Florida, feel free to add me to that as well, because I'm really going to be, I'm working on catching up on everything that's going on. So happy to be added to any lists that may clue me in on events and different things going on around the state. So with that, let's jump right in and get to the good stuff, why everyone's here. So Dr. Kuda, I am going to hand you the controls.
Okay, can you hear me, Emily, all right?
I can hear you well.
Okay, thank you. Okay. First of all, let me take this opportunity to thank the former Invasive Species Council Coordinator, Rose Godfrey, for inviting me to participate in this monthly CISMA call. I guess I got the original notification sometime in November of last year. And at that time, I said, I'm not really sure what I'm going to talk about. This is now, what, almost 8 months later. I just kept the title kind of general. But what I want to focus on today, oh, by the way, for a minute, let me also thank and appreciate the efforts of our new coordinator, Emily Bell, for coordinating today's presentation and I guess subsequent presentations. Thanks, Emily. What I want to talk about today is focus on one species, a big concern, obviously, in the heartland, and that is Brazilian pepper tree. Ooh, went a little bit too far. There we go. Oh, yeah. Brazilian pepper tree. And I want to particularly spend some time on a biocontrol agent that we are very optimistic that will be released this year, probably in the next, maybe I would say end of the summer, maybe early fall. It's already been through the review process. We just now, I heard the other day talking to my collaborator, Dr. Carrie Minter in Fort Pierce, that I think it's the Seminole tribe is reviewing some information about the insect to make sure they're going to sign off on it, okay? And I think once we get all the the T's crossed and the I's dotted on the approval process, we should be able to get that release permit fairly quickly. So what we're going to talk about today is an insect that you need to be really aware of because it's going to be out there. It's kind of a, whoa, I didn't do that. Something's going on here. It's moving by itself. Let me back up here. Oh, wrong way. There we go. Okay. It's going to be out there fairly soon, and it's a small insect, and it creates some very interesting and unique damage. So I thought I'd spend some time today focusing a little bit on this particular insect, and also kind of review where we are on the whole Brazilian pepper tree problem. There's some information that some of you already know, but some of you may not know. And one other thing I'd like to say before I really get into this is almost like old home week for me. I understand that Dr. Patrick Conant from the Big Island of Hawaii is on the call today, and we chatted a little bit, and I worked with Patrick on Brazilian pepper tree, one of the agents years ago, and it was good to hear from him. And I see Brian Cotterill from Lee County Mosquito Control District, or what I guess, yes, Mosquito Control District. Hadn't seen him in years, and we worked together, oh gosh, I guess it was probably in the early 90s, no, I guess it was probably the late or early 90s, somewhere in there. We worked on a project on a mosquito biocontrol, so nice to see you, Brian. All right, let's move on here. So we're going to talk about we're calling anyway, the yellow Brazilian pepper tree leaf galler, Calophylla latiforceps. And the title is Coming to a Brazilian Pepper Tree Infestation Near You. I want to thank also my co-authors, Drs. Bill Overholt, Rodrigo Diaz, and Veronica Manrique. Rodrigo and Veronica were some former PhD students. Rodrigo, for your information, now is in LSU. He's an assistant professor there, and I'll be working with him on some hydrilla project, hopefully in the near future. All right, little background on Brazil. Start out with, then go into the biology of the insect, mention and to some extent the results of the host range testing, because this was the whole crux of the whole release issue. You have to demonstrate safety. And I want to show you some of the data from that, show you some data on how we develop what we think is going to be the impact on Brazilian pepper tree from this insect. Talk a little bit, very briefly, about the risk, if any, of vectoring plant pathogens. And the reason we're going to bring this up is because this insect is a psyllid. And of course, we all know, you mentioned psyllid in Florida, and all you hear now is Asian citrus psyllid, and people get panicky. So I want to kind of allay any fears about this insect being involved in the transmission of any plant pathogens. Finally, I'll finish up with indirect effects of releasing the insect, some minor things, and then just summarize very briefly. All right, here we go. Brazilian pepper tree, Shyness Terabithifolia. And notice that the name was changed in 2015. Many of you probably still see in the literature and still use the older end of the name, Terabithifolias, but that now has been changed to folia to correspond, I think, what the taxonomists say, to the gender of the genus. It's female, so you use the IA instead of the IUS ending. But just now, you'll be seeing this more and more. Most of our recent literature since 2015, maybe even around that, yeah, I guess it was 2015, since then, when we talk about in our publications, we use Terabithifolia. As you all know, it's in the family Anacardiaceae, poison ivy family, because obviously it has some toxicity issues. I noticed within the past 15 years or so, since I've been working with it fairly extensively for a long time, I'm now very sensitive to the sap that get it on my skin. I have to now wear these long gloves when I'm out in the field that they use, I guess, to do inspection on cows when they go up to the back end and look for calves and stuff, these rubber gloves. But hey, they're a little warm, but they work. The plant is native to South America, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute, because that turned out to be pretty important for all of us. And it was introduced purposely as an ornamental, which many of our tree plants have been introduced into Florida. First time around 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, and then later in about 1926. The reason it's a problem, as you can see from the slide from Don Schmitz, this is section of, it used to be, I don't know if it looks the same way now, Hole in the Donut in Everglades National Park. It was a solid monoculture. And this was after they rock plowed the area and Brazilian pepper tree moved in following, I guess, the removal of any sort of agricultural practice. It just created a huge monoculture. Again, dispersed by birds and mammals. Now, let's talk a little bit about the genetics, because this turned out to be really huge for me. Early in my career working with Brazilian pepper tree, we would go to Brazil, collect some insects, certain insects. One of them was, by the way, one of the psyllids that I'm going to be talking about today, a relative of one of the psyllids. Bring it into quarantine, put it in our potted plants of Brazilian pepper tree, and within a few weeks they'd be dead. And we tried all sorts of things to figure out what the issue is. Is it something about the nutrient content? Is the soil wrong? Certain things about the temperature, humidity, all sorts. Even trying to figure out if the plant was called a mycorrhizal plant. So we added some nutrients to the soil to make sure the plant was getting the nutrients it needed to basically simulate what was going on in Brazil, but to no avail. So it wasn't until about 2005, a colleague, name was Dean Williams, who, by the way, I still work with. He was a postdoc then, but he's now at Texas Christian University. And he started working with us to look at the genetics of the plant. Now, if you look at the right here, this is the native range, Brazil, okay? Notice there are a bunch of letters. These represent all the different haplotypes or genotypes, as we call them. And I think there's 13 listed here, but there's actually, I think, 16. And what we discovered by doing collections in Brazil all throughout the distribution here, and then making collections in Florida here, we were able to determine that the source of the one that came into Punta Gorda, the West Coast one, is type A, which originally occurs in far southeastern Brazil in Santa Catarina State, Rio Grande do Sul, in that area. Okay. The other one that was introduced in Miami actually came from northern Brazil, okay? And it showed up here again. This was around the late 1800s, early 1900s. So you can see now we've got these two very distinct genotypes, type A and type B, that were introduced here in Florida. And now, remember, Brazilian pepper tree is a dioecious species, or separate male and female plants. The insect, or the plants are insect pollinated, bees primarily. And what happened, bees started moving around to pollen, and what we wound up with, mostly within the center part of the state, are hybrids between these A and B plants. So going back to Brazil for a moment, notice that here is A. Excuse me, on my phone right here. I'll take that off. Here we go. Is in southeastern Brazil. B is up here. This is a distance of about 800 kilometers. Okay, so in the native range, these two populations of Brazilian pepper never came in contact with each other. It wasn't until they came here. So now what we had, why Brazilian pepper tree is such a huge problem, boy, something just showed up on my screen. There we go. I don't know what that is. Why it's such a huge problem is because we have these novel hybrids. So you've probably heard of hybrid vigor. That's one of the reasons. And it also explained why some of the insects that I was trying to bring in, let's say from this area, which developed on C and D, they wouldn't develop on type A or B. So again, it was one of these things that took us a while to figure out, but once we got the genetics worked out, I think it's made it a lot better for us. And this is even going to be more important for the next agent, in addition to the one I'm going to talk about today. It's called the Brazilian pepper thrips. That may be a topic for another day. But the Brazilian pepper thrips also is affected by these different genotypes. Okay, next slide here. Okay, moving. Something's going on here. There we go. Okay, I think that's right. Let me back up here, make sure. Yeah, okay. Now, this is the current distribution of Brazilian pepper tree in the United States. You can see up here around California on the far west, Hawaiian Islands. Like I said, I worked with Pat Conant there, and the big island right here, for those of you who may not be familiar with the island archipelago, is South Texas. I spent some time there. I went to school at Texas A&M, which is right about here. But at that time, I was not aware of Brazilian pepper tree, although it is down in Galveston Island now. You can see Alabama here, but obviously Georgia, Florida, and mostly Florida is the big winner here. And you can see Franklin County here. This is the county up in Georgia, I believe, and then this is Duval County here. And you can see the whole state's pretty much covered by it. So those of you in the heartland are obviously very interested in what we're doing because you're right in the center here of the whole mix. All right, what are the problems that Brazilian pepper tree causes? Well, obviously it causes huge ecological impacts to threatened and endangered species. One of them was called the Beech cluster vine, or Jack Montioreclineta. It looks something like this. It's in the Convolvulaceae family of vine. It occurs down here along the southeastern districts, or excuse me, counties of Florida. And why is this an issue? Is because Brazilian pepper trees, we all know, once it gets into a system, it grows very aggressively, and it's also allelopathic. In other words, it secretes chemicals into the soil that prevent other plants from growing. So some of these plants are really vulnerable, particularly things like this one. Another one that's of concern is it's called the beech star. Until recently, it was called Rameria maritima. That's the old name. It's now referred to as Cyprus Dunculatus, another one along the coast, although it gets a little further north along the coast of the eastern part of the state. But again, another one of these threatened or endangered state or federal listed species. This one is kind of interesting. This is the gopher tortoise. Now, gopher tortoises are protected under state law, but not only the tortoise itself, but its burrow. And that's kind of interesting because the roots of Brazilian pepper tree, they create a system whereby it gets into the burrows, it disrupts the burrow structure of gopher tortoises. So again, gopher tortoises, although they're already having problems, they're being threatened. I believe this is a Brazilian pepper tree right here in the picture.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. Now, those are the ecological, environmental impacts. How about economic impacts? I got these data from one of our colleagues in the agronomy department, Dr. Luke Florey, who works with invasive species to a large extent now. From about 2005 to 2014, the state of Florida spent an estimated $34 million just to control Brazilian pepper. That's a pretty good chunk of change. And just even last year, if you look at the money spent by the water management districts, almost $2 million just for between 2017 and 2018. The lion's share comes from the South Florida Water Management District, but this is the one where Brazilian pepper trees primarily in the Everglades in that area, and they're trying to do a really good job trying to clean it up. But St. Johns River and well as Southwest Florida is spending quite a bit of their resources on Brazilian pepper tree. Another interesting tidbit here is that cattle ranchers in South Florida rank Brazilian pepper tree as the third most important weed of pastures. I'm guessing things like maybe tropical soda apple was #1, although that's not a problem anymore, thanks to biological control primarily. And then Kogan grass could be another one that's causing some issues there for them. Now, other impacts. In addition to being an invasive species in its own right, Brazilian pepper tree supports other invasive species. Here on the upper left is what's called the Diaprepes root weevil. It's an invasive insect from the Caribbean for years, and probably still could be. For years, it was a major pest of citrus. As we all know, citrus has been hammered lately by the Asian citrus psyllid and HLB disease, citrus greening. So citrus is actually in a bit of a decline. But I'll just mention, today I just got an article that came right off the Vegetable and Specialty Crop News. Citrus root weevil invades Florida blueberries. So now they're using replacement species to try to come up with alternatives for citrus and growing blueberry shrubs, and now the weevil's moving into that. And it has, obviously, unlike our Brazilian pepper tree insects, this insect has an extremely broad host range. It could develop on quite a bit of a variety of different plants. But the key point here is that if we can eliminate or basically create a situation where Brazilian pepper tree is reduced to a dull roar, in other words, not very abundant, or at least not as abundant as it currently is, we could probably minimize this natural host for the Diaprepes root weevil, and maybe hopefully eliminate or reduce its populations. The black iguana, Brian Cottrell might know a little bit about this, is down there, Gorilla Island, I believe, or something. That these things occur down in that area. They were, I guess, released on the island or escaped on the island, and they love Brazilian pepper tree leaves, particularly during the winter months. This particular lizard really kind of goes crazy on them, and again, the Brazilian pepper serves as a primary food source during the winter months for this particular herbivorous lizard. Finally, red banded thrips. This is a major pest, another invasive species insect, major pest of mango primarily, but really loves Brazilian pepper tree. In fact, when we were growing quite a few Brazilian peppers, in fact, we still do down in Fort Pierce area, this is a major problem for us, and we have to be very careful about what we use to treat this insect or try to control it, because anything that would be a toxicant for this insect would be a toxicant for our biocontrol agents. So it's a kind of a, you got to be careful what you do and try to come up with creative ways to control some of these insects. So in other words, Brazilian pepper, invasive species in its own right, but supports other pest problems here in the state of Florida. Here's a really interesting one. Brian Cotterill, I know, is going to like this one. This is the Asian tiger mosquito in the upper left-hand corner. When I first came to Florida in the early 19, well, I guess about 1990, my first year, this insect was moving across the state, and then I was able to be one of the individuals who discovered it in Hillsborough County. You notice here there's this white stripe right on the backs. That's the diagnostic character, and you can see it very clearly even here in a smaller picture to the right. This is what's called a container breeder. Most of us here down in Florida, we have any sort of little container outside in our yard, a bucket, an old tire, a dog dish that you don't empty out periodically, those little trays under your flower pots that you don't empty out regularly will start breeding these mosquitoes. So what happens, once the female lays her eggs just on the margin of a kind of a semi-dry or partially dry container, when it fills up with water, it causes a change in oxygen tension, which stimulates the larvae to hatch out of the egg. And once the larvae get in this container, you can see there's like decayed organic matter, leaf tissue, and so on. The larvae use this nutrient broth. That's their way of completing their development. They feed on that broth. And as they grow in size, they eventually complete their life cycle and then become adults. Well, this paper by a postdoc at Vero Beech, published in 2009, showed, and this is the percent of female survival here on the leaves of different plant species that were put in containers to hold the broth. One is Australian pine, not native, obviously. Live oak, the native, I say, plant here that most of the litter would come down. And then Brazilian pepper tree. Notice that you get higher densities of female Asian tiger mosquitoes from containers containing Brazilian pepper tree leaves. So again, in some situations, you could argue that this particular plant not only is a nuisance, economic nuisance, ecological nuisance, but it could also be a public health threat by supporting the development of this Asian tiger mosquito, which is a vector of dengue, Zika, and I guess a couple other things. Now, the question here about biocontrol is, what do we have to do, or what needs to be done to control Brazilian pepper tree? And what study was done fairly recently from about 2014 to 2016 to see if there was anything currently out in our system prior to releasing these insects that's having any sort of impact? There were a couple of lists published in the mid-'80s about insects associated with Brazilian pepper tree. And some of them look like they could be. There are probably some general pests of other things, but we wanted to see just currently what's out there. And what was done, my colleague Bill Overholt and my current graduate student, Patricia Paraj, they've been monitoring what's happening. And you can see here, FTP stands for Fort Pierce, C is control, and T is treatment. The other one is IMM. This is for control, and IMM, which is Immokalee treatment. And the Immokalee lines are indicated by diamonds, the Fort Pierce by the circle. So here's the Fort Pierce growths up here. And you can see that when you treat repeatedly Brazilian pepper tree with an insecticide, in this case imidacloprid, to eliminate or I guess exclude any sort of herbivorous insects, it really has no impact on plant height, either here in Fort Pierce or Immokalee, although if you notice that the Immokalee plants did not grow as well as the ones at Fort Pierce, but still there was no difference between the treatments or the controls within each experimental group. Stem diameter, the same phenomenon, even though you had general growth over time, although the stem diameter was fairly comparable between the two different sites, okay? If you look at reproduction, protected, in other words, insects are excluded chemically, and then unprotected plants, total fruits times 1,000 here at Fort Pierce. Looks like they've got almost 5 times as more fruit coming off Fort Pierce as opposed to Immokalee, but even within the treatments, no significant difference. This was surprising to me a little bit because there is an insect called the Brazilian pepper tree seed wasp Megastigmus transvalensis, which originally is native to South Africa, and it showed up here in the mid-'80s, and it's pretty much distributed throughout the range of Brazilian pepper tree, and the larvae attack the fruits of Brazilian pepper tree. And I would have thought that if you chemically excluded the insect, which I assuming we were at the time, or they were, that you'd get a more dramatic effect of this chemical exclusion, but it does not seem to be the case. So what we can glean from this is that there's not much out there affecting the growth or reproduction of Brazilian pepper tree. So those are the two things that we're going to have to hopefully address with this biocontrol agent. So let's talk a little bit about this insect. Calophyia species associated with Brazilian pepper tree. We're going to talk about this one today, Calophyia lata forceps, the yellow leaf gauler. And there's actually a complex of 3 we're currently studying right now. The one from down in southeastern Brazil is called Calophyia Terabithifolia. It's yellow and black. Calophyia lutea from the mid-range, striped leaf gauler, and yellow leaf gauler. And we use these common names based on the appearance of what are called the 5th instars, which are embedded in the leaf. This is the damaging stage right here, these nips that embed into the leaf. You can see there's a yellow one, here's the striped one, and then here's the banded one here. So we're going to focus on Calophyia lata forceps today. It's native to Brazil, northern Brazil. Adults are kind of green, particularly when they are newly emerged, they're kind of greenish and yellow, but then they turn mostly yellow. The nymphs, or the females, they lay their eggs along the leaf margin, and then the larvae, the young larvae, what are called crawlers, come out. They kind of crawl slowly across the leaf. They find this area on the leaf that they find suitable. They stop and then embed themselves right into the leaf tissue, where they start feeding and creating this gall around themselves. Now the gall is an open gall. You can, underneath you'll see, I think it's some other photos here, it creates like a pit, but this is open on the top. So the insect, the top dorsal surface of the insect is here, and you can see a nymph feeding here. When they complete their development, they just, pop right out of the skin and become an adult. All right? You can see some of the gall damage here from the insect. So in the native range, this is down in, I guess, northeastern Brazil. They looked at the extent or occurrence of the psyllid galls per leaf in the presence of its own natural enemies, a parasite and a native pathogen down there. And you can see in most cases, even though the insect could be heavily parasitized, knowing here at the lake region or the university, the abundance of the psyllids were still pretty high, which means that there may be some what's called accidental or non-target or general predator or predation on the insect, or excuse me, general on the insects once they're released, but it doesn't seem to affect them per se. So that's at least what we're seeing in the field. The insect can basically do its thing and reproduce to high levels, even in the presence of its own natural enemies. Okay, let's see here. All right, here's the key to all this now, the host range test, because this is going to determine whether or not you can get approval to release this insect. And what we've wound up doing, 99 species and or genotypes, in the case of Brazilian pepper, we had to do different genotypes, were tested within 44 families and 24 orders. And we used no choice oviposition development tests, paired choice oviposition, and adult longevity. Oviposition means egg laying, and you allow the insect to develop on it. Paired choice, you give the insect a choice between 2 different host plants, and an adult longevity is to see, you put new adults on, see how long they survive. This was all done at the laboratory, quarantine laboratory in Fort Pierce by our graduate student, Dr. Rodrigo Diaz, who now is, like I said, is at Fort Pierce. These are some of the cages that we used in the rearing process. So this is a very busy slide. I don't normally show these, but these are results with no choice, no position development. What you're looking at here, mostly up until about right here, from this point on up, are all members of the Anacardiaceae that could be at risk from damage by the insect, and there are some other ones that showed maybe some native plants that occur in our system that maybe had some oviposition. If you go over to this column here, where it says eggs per female, you'll notice all the way down there's some incidence of minor egg laying on almost all these plants, maybe in 1 or 2 cases, but in some cases they did oviposit on all of these plants. But the key point here, and I've circled this, is survival. None of the insects were able to complete their development on any plant other than Brazilian pepper tree haplotypes, hybrid, and even an unknown haplotype. Even though it wasn't measured, they did get some development. But you can see the specificity is extreme, and you'll understand this even further toward the end of the talk when I talk about a related species on Shyness molly, which is called Peruvian pepper tree. But this was the key. These were the data that the technical advisory group had to look at, and we had to convince them that this insect was going to be safe to release. Here's the paired choice oviposition test. This was a little bit surprising to me. So the insect, in terms of oviposition, oviposited in all cases on its host plant, Brazilian pepper tree, but to some extent on poison ivy, which is really a little bit surprising, but very little on the closest plant related to Brazilian pepper tree. This is Peruvian pepper tree, Shyness molly, which occurs in California. Rhus aromatica had some oviposition, Copalina, our native wing sumac. And then this was the most surprising to me of all. I've had a lot of trouble over the years when I've worked with different insects. One of them that Patrick Conant and I worked with is a Piscimus caterpillar that was released in Hawaii. Many insects we think are specialists on Brazilian pepper tree also seem to do very well on Pistacia vera. This is cultivated pistachio. And the reason being is that chemically, Brazilian pepper tree, Shyness terabithifolia, of all the species is most closely related chemically to this genus, Pistacia, than it is to other species of Shyness. So in some respects, you might argue that Brazilian pepper tree ought to be in the genus Pistacia, but it is not. But this was surprising. No eggs at all were deposited on Pistacia vera, which, again, in my own tests, other insects, Pistacia vera was almost a given. You're going to get some sort of impact. Here's the adult survival, looking at different species of the Anacardiaceae and then water as a control here. You can see that this dashed line, this is the adult survival on Brazilian pepper trees, host plant over almost 19 days, followed by, I think this is Rhus typhina, which is a member of the Anacard. This is only at 5 days, and then followed by Shyness molly, the other congenitor of Brazilian pepper tree. Again, 4 or 5 days, but clearly adult survival and feeding is occurring primarily on Brazilian pepper tree, and because that's obviously its normal host. So between all these tests, I think the specificity was pretty much confirmed. If you look at proportion of plants that exhibited gall formation collected from a variety of different locations throughout the state, you can see a proportion of gall formation here. Plants pretty much in this region, looks like from about Marion County south, would all be susceptible to this particular insect if it were released and the guy was able to establish. 58% of the trees on average were susceptible. Okay, now we know the insect's safe. We know it can develop on our Brazilian pepper trees, but what's it going to do once we release it? Well, these are the results of impact studies. You can see here, these are some laboratory plants that are pretty heavily galled, and you can see the galls is kind of like a yellow margin around the insect here. This is what the insect does as it completes its development. So you need to be keeping an eye on this, and remember this when you go out in the field after the insect is released, because this will be your first indication that the insect is establishing in your area. By the way, this shows it underneath. This one image right here, this is the underneath of a leaflet. The gall is much more prevalent here because this is the underside where the gall is kind of embedded down into that leaf. You can see it really clearly. Impact. This is, I think, about 45 days after the insect was released. There's a control where we didn't do anything, and then this is one that was exposed to the insect. Plant growth was limited to just about half, okay? How about chlorophyll, effect on chlorophyll? The controls are in green. Those with insects are in blue, and you can see that leaf chlorophyll production was significantly reduced even after 5 weeks after the insects were settled into the leaf tissue. So again, chlorophyll production, or I guess chlorophyll content, was actually being reduced. This is work that was done by my current PhD student, Patricia Prada. Photosynthesis related to chlorophyll, and you can see here, this is measured by net carbon dioxide assimilation. You can see after 15 days, these are no insects, these are the controls in blue. The red, or excuse me, the orange are with leaves with the insect, the actual infested leaf. And these are the leaflets on the same plant that have the insect, but they themselves are not infested. But you predominantly those that have the insect, photosynthesis rate is dramatically reduced. In some cases, on other leaves of the plant where the insect doesn't occur, you're getting a minor decline, but in most cases that's not significant. But clearly where the insect is occurring on those leaflets, their photosynthesis capability is almost shut down. A little slow here. Let's see. Okay, this is now effect. This is the visible effect on the plant. Okay, this is the organismic effect. Okay, you can look at leaf area, change in height, and leaf abscission. With this Calophylla, the leaf area is dramatically reduced. Okay, it's almost reduced in more than half in terms of leaf area production. Change in height is reduced. That was manifested in that one slide I showed you earlier. And in leaf abscission, at really high densities, you can see this is with the insect, this is without. Very little abscission, obviously, when the plant's not affected by the insect, but when you have a high density, oh, this is like almost 50% of the leaflets are now off the tree at high densities. Okay, this is where 50 adults are released every 2 weeks. Okay, keep pressing here. Now, what does this all mean? Well, I was interested in this insect many years ago, but this one in particular, Calophylla skinny, because it was already in California, and I knew it could be quite damaging, all right? But its natural host is what's called Peruvian pepper tree, Shyness molly. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. If it's already in California, maybe it'll go on Brazilian pepper tree, so I'll get an interstate permit to move it to Florida, which is a lot easier than getting an international permit. And contacted some colleagues at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and he said, sounds like a nice idea, Dr. Kuda, except for one thing. Brazilian pepper tree, as you remember now, occurs in Southern California from that distribution map. Well, so does Shyness molly. They are basically sympatric. The guys there told me that where this insect occurs, you only see damage shown here, a leaf abscission on Shyness molly, its natural host. None of the Brazilian pepper tree plants were affected at all. So this shows you the level of specificity exhibited by these insects. This is Calophylla skinny, only on Shyness molly. The one on Forceps, hopefully Lutea and Terabithifolia on the different types of Brazilian pepper tree. Anyway, this caused extreme damage. The way the method that they used to get the system back in balance was they went back to Peru. They found a tiny parasitic wasp, introduced that into California, and that pretty much solved the problem. So again, releasing these insects without their own natural enemies is the key. Now, this is the Calophylla skinny model here. You get the insect, you get the gall production, here's the host plant, and you get traumatic leaf abscission and leaf drop. And in some cases, it could be even higher than that. Calophylla Forceps, our insect, okay? Here's the gall production, here's Terabithifolia. But are we going to get the same effect? That remains to be seen. We will not know exactly what we're going to get for sure until those releases are made. We're able to monitor establishment and evaluate the impact. Okay, risk of vectoring plant pathogens, really quickly. What about psyllids? Okay, as I mentioned, there's this big concern about psyllids down in Florida because of citrus greening. The term psyllid is a common name for insects in this order, Psylloidea, okay, which contains different families. Calophylla Forceps is in the family Calophyidae on the far right. The Asian citrus psyllid is in this family, Psyllidae, on the far left, able to transmit Liberobacter, and so is the Triosidae, carrot psyllid, another psyllid able to transmit plant viruses, bacteria. And you can see that none have been associated with any of the Calophyidae. So that's a good thing for us. So I think we're pretty safe in terms of any sort of disease transmission. Indirect effects of releasing the insect. Well, for one thing, I think if we could reduce the density of Brazilian pepper tree, the gopher tortoises are going to be a lot happier. Some of the birds may not be as happy that feed on the berries of Brazilian pepper tree, but they'll find alternative sources, I'm sure. But I think the good news is hopefully this would be a good positive effect for gopher tortoises. Some immediate kind of short-term issues, as we showed you, this is the Shyness molly picture here. This could lead to, if the populations really build up rapid leaf abscission, which was shown here in California. This could cause some temporary effects on soil nutrients. You get a flush of growth and other organic matter, and could even be some non-persistent increases in allelopathic compounds in the soil, because these allelopathic compounds are found in the leaves. They drop. As they leach out, they could cause some issues, but that will be temporary because those leaves are now dead. But I think the good news is that the canopy is going to be opened up in favor of more desirable native vegetation, which is, again, what we're trying to do is reduce Brazilian pepper tree to a minor component of the Florida and allow our native vegetation to recover. So, summary, host range extremely limited. Almost 100 plant taxa tested. Only development on Brazilian pepper tree, complete development. Impacts are dramatic. Chlorophyll, photosynthesis, and growth were affected. No risk of diseases transmitted by this psyllid. That's what we're calling also the leaf gall. Any indirect effects that could happen from leaf abscission and so on could be minor and temporary. The good news is that the U.S. Technical Advisory Group for Biocontrol Agents of Weeds, they did recommend release. This is now going on over 2 years. This thing was recommended for release by the review committee over 2 years ago. We're finally now at a point where I think we're finally going to get our release permit summer or fall this year. So that's what we're pretty excited about. And I'll leave you with one other item here. This is an article that we put out in our department. It's called, well, it's a whole group of articles called Featured Creatures. These are like informational brochures that target or focus on a particular insect. I wrote this one fairly recently. It gives information on the distribution, description, life cycle biology, economic importance, and so on. I would suggest, and here's the website where you can access this, I would suggest that all of you that are going to be in that area, download this or bookmark it or something, so that when the insect comes out, you can look at this and get a better idea of what to be looking for, and when you see it, and hopefully you're going to see quite a bit of them fairly soon. And with that, I will say thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Kudo. We can probably take a few questions, and remember, if you're muted, if you have a question, to please unmute. Anybody have a question they'd like to ask Dr. Kudo?
I do. This is Anissa Kareem.
Okay.
Dr. Kudo, you showed a slide comparing leaves that had insects on them that were infested versus leaves that had insects on them where the leaves were not infested. Would you tell me the difference between infestation, how you determine infestation?
Well, whether or not you can see like the galls are going to be established on those leaflets, and you may have some up a little further up or down in the canopy that are on that same plant, but they have no galls on. So those are the ones that we're trying to see. Or is it kind of a what's called a whole plant effect just from the insects on the leaves further away from those non-attacked leaves.
Gotcha. So it's just the presence or absence of galls.
Right.
Yep. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Dr. Kudo?
I have a question. It's Alex Amisco. I was wondering that if, say, we're doing invasive plant management and we find the Brazilian pepper with the galls and the insects on it, should we avoid treating those, or is there just so much pepper out there that they'll move on?
Well, they'll probably move on, but during the initial release phases, I think we're going to probably contact folks to number one, if you find them, we need to get a geolocation. We want to find out how the insects are spreading from the original release points. And I would, at this point, I would say maybe just mark those initial plants until we get some really good populations going, and then we'll go from there. But it's going to be critical for us to get establishment. And establishment requires, I would say, at least a full field season to confirm that it's going to be able to withstand all the environmental conditions exposed. Now, again, we've had some pretty dramatic weather between the hurricanes last year, the freezes. So we just don't know what's going to happen. So if you find them out there, I would just mark them, geoposition it, send it to us, and we'll probably put out instructions fairly soon here about what you need to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Okay, I will open up for one more question, and then we'll move on. Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask?
Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah, who am I speaking to? Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the honeybees are the main pollinator, you think? And are there beekeepers that rely on those flowers?
Do they rely on them? To some extent they do, although here in Florida, I've worked with our local bee folks. Our bee entomologist, Jamie Ellis, has worked with the folks as well. And we tried to make the case that, Brazilian pepper tree is going to be on its way out. The good news is with biological control, it's going to be a kind of a subtle, kind of a long-term thing. And it's not going to be like, you go through one day and you got bulldozers in or basically herbicides, and 48 hours later, all the plants are dead. It's not going to happen that way. So in areas where releases are being made for the biocontrol agents, obviously we're going to leave those alone. And then any bees that are in that area over time, eventually they're going to have to move out. But I think that the good news is for the beekeepers, again, they're dealing with other problems here like colony collapse and a whole bunch of other things. But I think they're going to come up with some other plants to replace Brazilian pepper. And I think they're currently looking at some right now. I know Jamie Ellis has been really adamant about talking to beekeepers that they can't continue to support their colonies on these invasive plants, Melaleuca, Brazilian pepper, and so on.
Agreed.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Kuda, and great questions.
Okay.
So with that, we are going to move on to our Florida Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area update. And today we're going to hear from Treasure Coast CISMA. It covers kind of that south central Florida coastline of Indian River County, St. Lucie County, Martin County, and Palm Beach County. So we have co-chair Alex with us today to update us on their activities.
Great, thanks, Emily. That was a really good introduction to our CISMA. Like Emily said, we have Indian River County, St. Lucie County, Martin County, and Palm Beach County. This one's working. I'll see if I can get my slides to come up. And I'll also try to get this information to you guys within our allotted time here. There we go. Okay. So the Treasure Coast CISMA structure is that we have two co-chairs. We have workday coordinators, private land leads, because we partner a lot with different private landowners in treating exotics. We have Tonkitas as a Boy Scout reservation, and we have two members that coordinate treatments there, because we also have grant money that goes towards that project, and it's been an ongoing project for years now. We have EDR leads, a grant administrator, invasive animal lead, and outreach lead, which is currently open, education and training, and a ranch land outreach lead. So not everyone that holds one of these positions is super active, but when a call has been made, people generally tend to step up and help out where they can. I kind of wanted to cover our accomplishments for about a year. I came on as co-chair a year from this month, or so like a year ago from this month. And so since we generally slow down our activities in the summer, I wanted to highlight some stuff we did in the fall and of the fall of 17 to now. So we've had 2 workshops, 6 work days, 4 outreach events we've tabled at, probably more than 5 on-site meetings with private landowners. Like I mentioned, we get a lot of calls from them and requests for assistance with various problems. We've only held 2 CISMA meetings, so I have to get another one on the schedule. And we've had 1 ongoing / successful EDR project within our CISMA. So I'm just going to go through and highlight some of our work days and workshops. We recently had a grass identification workshop with George Rogers from Palm Beach State College, and he, with some helpers, taught us how to identify various native and non-native grasses within our CISMA area. And then another workshop we did was with Palm Beach County. There was a call that went out, and we thought it would be a good idea if land managers invited the CISMA out to different properties to look at either success stories or challenges and kind of go over different ways they've handled some of these challenges and see if other members of the CISMA had also dealt with those. Certain treatment strategies for different problematic species or had techniques they've employed that have led to positive outcomes. So Palm Beach County invited the CISMA out. We talked about their different strategies for treating invasive plants, how they deal with invasive animals, and then they gave us a tour of once disturbed site where they created a wetland. So next I'll highlight, for NESAW week, I'll highlight some of our work days. We had a pretty good project going for NESAW week. It's still kind of ongoing. The Treasure Coast CISMA, one of their original goals was to treat scaevola or beech nymphaca on private land, since in a lot of our area, the public lands had really stepped up and treated a lot of these species, or treated the scaevola and gotten out of public conservation land. So it's been a long time effort to try to remove this species from private land. So the CISMA partnered with this HOA condominium on the beach, and an agreement was made that the CISMA would provide the labor and the herbicide, and the HOA would provide and remove a dumpster where we could put the plant material. They'll replant, they're dealing with native vegetation, and they'll also incorporate any future invasive treatments into their regular maintenance schedule. So we got a big group out, and that was the before picture of the scaevola, and this is at the very end of the day. I believe it was between a quarter an acre and half an acre of dense scaevola that was removed, and then various other patches mixed in with the sea grape. And we left them a nice bare spot. But while this work was going on, you can see different members of the CISMA attacking this giant patch from all different angles, and we had people partner up, cutting and dragging vegetation. And if you look on the left side of this picture, circled in red, there's somebody underneath that balcony, and what's under there is a carport where we had to push the vegetation down into this carport. That was probably like an 8-foot drop below us, and I was fearful all day somebody was going to fall and break their neck, and nobody did. And from there, from the carport, we had to drag the scaevola, the cut scaevola, out to a dumpster. By the end of the day, we had the dumpster completely full, and with the permission of the HOA president, we were able to leave the rest of the vegetation in the carport, and their maintenance crews would dispose of that material after they had the first dumpster load taken to the dump and replaced back in the parking lot. So we still have to go back and do one more round of kind of cleanup treatments, and then they'll be replanting with sea oats, sea grapes, and possibly a few other species that we've suggested to them. So the next work day we did, in the past it's kind of been hard to get the CISMA up to Indian River County. We're such a long linear county. Sometimes we get stuck focusing in kind of Palm Beach and Martin County. So we specifically wanted to host a work day in Indian River County. And the tract of land where we had the work day is actually kind of an easement, but it's adjacent to some of their county parks and natural areas. So we thought it was really important to get this easement cleaned up because it was highly infested with Lygodium. So we had members of the CISMA come out, Friends of Sebastian River came out to volunteer and help, and the county brought out their maintenance crews that usually just work within the boundaries of their parks. And so something that was kind of maybe unique that came from this was that the lead of the maintenance crew took a video, and we kind of made this little video showing how to identify climbing fern, how it spreads, how it reproduces, how to treat it, what chemicals to use, what methods to use, and then we explained the importance of decontaminating their equipment before they go and work in other natural areas. So it was just kind of a cool on-the-fly little way to make sure that they got this information, they were able to remember it because they could watch the video over again, and we did a little outreach while we did this work day. And the next one, probably my last big example, is we wanted to treat shoe button rhodesia on an Audubon property. So this is private conservation land, and this is about a 10-acre parcel, and it's pretty much an out parcel within a state park. And so the state park had been treating this area for shoe button rhodesia for years, using their own funding and with assistance from FWC's Uplands programs. And there was constantly the seed source just pretty much within their boundaries. So the park biologist pitched the idea to the CISMA, and he also got permission from Audubon. Audubon said they didn't really have the funding to treat the exotics, but they were in full support of the CISMA going out and hosting various work days to try to treat these plants. So this is just the shoe button rhodesia, kind of a wall of it. And you can see it's in fruit and it's feeding, so it's going to be, we're going to need to be back there for a few additional work days. This is pretty much from the same position, an after shot from the work day, and you can see we cleared out quite a bit of rhodesia. And just some pictures of different members. We had 12 people total came out, and we were able to treat 2 acres, so we're on our way. And something else we've tried to implement after all of our work days is kind of to do a self-compliance inspection. So we went back out to the site 2.5, 3 months after the treatment. We walked around, looked at everything we treated, tried to see if there was anything resprouting from the cut stumps, and also to evaluate how much work is going to be left and try to schedule it for another work day. We just want to make sure that before we go out repeating the same treatments for these species, what we did in the past actually worked. So this was a pretty successful compliance inspection. I was really happy because this shoe button rhodesia is sometimes really difficult to treat and to kill. Something our CISMA does is we partner with alternative spring breakers. These are groups of college kids that instead of traditionally going out and drinking and partying during spring break, they commit their week of spring break to doing service-based projects, community service projects. So they partner, one school partners with Martin County and another school partners with the Nature Conservancy's Blowing Rock Preserve. And so we'll usually try to set up a work day or two when the students are visiting. That way we can do outreach and then also kind of harness their energy and excitement to treating invasive species. And lastly, we had an EDRR project. We had Aero Bamboo, which is a running bamboo, show up at Hobetown National Wildlife Refuge. So the CISMA went out and we did a work day. It wasn't, I believe it was about 2 acres of this bamboo. And there hadn't been a lot of bamboo work done. So the CISMA went out and we tested different herbicide rates and treatment methods for killing this bamboo. And once we had something that worked, FWC's EDRR funding kicked in and they were able to get contractors out to treat the species. So we were actually supposed to have a follow-up work day yesterday to treat some of the misses and some of the resprouting bamboo, but we got rained out, so that'll be rescheduled for, I think, later next month. And so these pictures just show you on the left the treated bamboo, and it's on this really steep incline that you can kind of see on the picture on the right. The picture on the right was when we did our compliance inspection, and it was just a nice day to be out there. So even though we don't have an outreach chair right now, we're still able to participate and table, and we've got great members of the CISMA who will go on their own free time during the weekends and will promote the CISMA for us. So in the future, we'll have to revamp, I think, some of our materials and get some outreach materials that we can hand out to people. But for now, we're still able to participate in outreach events. And then for the future, I've got a lot on the plate to do for CISMA. We need to update our EDR list, our MOU, our annual plan. We need some volunteer forms for when we're working on private land. There's a few other issues we'll be working on during the summer months, since CISMA activities tend to slow down here in South Florida during that time. And so we'll get some meetings on the table and talk about what we'll do next fall. One activity that we're trying to plan is a joint CISMA survey. So we'll get together with eCISMA to survey for an EDR species mission graph, which is showing up along some of the canals in South Florida. And something we're hoping to do is implement more workshops offering CEUs for our members and prioritize and seek grants for private land projects. So now you are all fully up to date on the Treasure Coast CISMA's activities. And if anybody has questions, I might have a minute or so to take them.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. That was a great update. You guys have been getting a lot done and have a lot of exciting future plans. Does anyone have a really quick question? Otherwise, I'll move on. And in the interest of time, please feel free to reach out, either through me or directly to Alex if you have any questions about what Treasure Coast is doing. But anyone have a real quick question? Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up real quick, because we do promise to keep you on time here on our CISMA calls. Let me try and get my slides moving again. There we go. So I promised to get better at the shout outs, but just for now, thank you to everyone who participated today and all your efforts that you do, wherever you are, wherever you're working. Everyone in our network is doing such great stuff. So thank you for continuing to do that great work. Oh, sorry. Okay. Then just a quick reminder, the FISP CISMA calendar is available online. So this is a go-to place to check in and see what's going on with FISP and the statewide CISMAs. For the CISMA leads, please remember to be keeping this up to date. And if you have any questions about how to do that, you can always reach out to me and I can help you out there. Or if you have anything you would like, if you're a partner, a FISP partner, and you have anything you'd like to get on there, just reach out and we can do that. Next month's call, we're going to actually be hearing from Alex again. So thank you so much for your time to talk about this new invasive species in Florida. And we will have an update from Nature Coast CISMA. And then here is we've got our next 5 months scheduled. And then we'll be working on our schedule for the beginning of 2019. So if you have any ideas, if you ever see a great presentation or have a topic that you think would be valuable, please send that my way. I'm happy to look into that and get some things that you guys want to be learning. So definitely always just keep your ears out and send me anything you see of interest that we might be able to cover on these calls. I'm going to skip that this time in the interest of time again. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I saw that I had a question in chat, and so I will follow up with Dr. Kuda on that and get back to the person that asked that question. Again, we have a call on the 4th Wednesday of every month except November and December, and we promise you'll enjoy it and that it'll only last an hour. So I think we are right on time, just a few minutes over, but again, thanks to everyone. Thank you, especially Dr. Kuda and Alex, for your contributions today and your time, and look forward to talking to you guys all again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily.